A black woman was boarding her early morning flight, just another business trip, or so she thought. But the moment she stepped into the first-class line, a gate agent stopped her cold. Said her ticket was flagged. Said her ID looked suspicious. Said nothing that made sense, except the unspoken message, "You don't belong here." 7 minutes later, that gate agent was no longer employed. What happened in between? It shook the entire terminal and triggered a federal investigation no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we dive in, comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from today. And if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe for more. It started like any other morning. You learn over time that racism is not always a brick hurled through a window or a burning cross on a lawn. Sometimes it's a pause, a glance, a sentence with too many words that mean too little. And sometimes it's the very air in a room, stale, quiet, complicated. It was in this air that Isaiah Bell walked through Gate 22 at LaGuardia on a Tuesday morning with nothing but a backpack, a boarding pass, and the weight of being black in America. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was tired. Not from travel, but from a life lived knowing the door might open, but someone would always be standing there to ask, "Why you?" Isaiah was 63, a retired teacher and a widower. He had seen the arc of history bend, but never quite enough to give rest. That morning, he wore a herringbone coat and brown leather shoes that had been resolved 3 times, still holding firm, just like him. He walked towards seat 3A, a window seat he'd selected 2 months prior when he booked the flight to Atlanta for his goddaughter's wedding. He didn't believe in flying coaches. Not anymore. Not after decades spent budgeting school supplies out of his own paycheck while others took bonuses for doing less than nothing. He passed rows of heads bowed to phones, heard the distant voice of a child asking why clouds move, and saw a flight attendant, young, white, hair slicked to look older, watching him like a question mark. When Isaiah reached row 3, he paused. A woman already sat in 3B, pearl earrings, pearls around her neck, and a mouth pinched so tight it looked as if it had been stapled shut. She didn't greet him, just clutched her purse closer, as if to ward off something she'd never dared to understand. Isaiah placed his bag overhead and lowered himself into his seat. He looked out the window, let his hands rest on his lap, and waited for the silence to become something. It did. The flight attendant, his name tag read Colton, approached after a few minutes. "Excuse me, sir," he said, a smile painted on. "I'm sorry, but there's been a request. Would you mind switching seats?" Isaiah turned, slowly. "A request from whom?" Colton coughed once, glanced at the woman beside him who now gazed at her magazine like it was the Bible. "She prefers a window seat. We have another one near the rear of the plane." "Same class." Isaiah studied the man. "Is that your policy? Or just a polite way of saying I make her uncomfortable?" Colton's smile cracked. "I assure you, sir, it's just a preference request." "And my preference," Isaiah said, voice even but firm, "is to remain in the seat I paid for." A silence followed, not the kind born of confusion, but the kind that grows when everyone pretends not to hear what they've all been taught to ignore. The woman shifted. Colton smiled again, tighter this time, and walked off. Isaiah exhaled, but the air didn't feel clean. It carried with it an old stench. The kind that reminded him of Birmingham in '63, of job interviews where his resume meant less than his skin, of how even in 2025, a black man in a good seat must be ready to defend it. They took off 30 minutes later. No one said another word about the seat. But something had shifted. Not in the cabin, but in Isaiah's chest. That morning, he'd wanted to be left alone. But now he felt something stirring. A quiet anger. The kind that doesn't shout, but builds. Because the question was never really about the seat. It was about whether he belonged in it. And the world, even now, wasn't sure of the answer. The air in the cabin had not settled. It hovered thick with unspoken things, like fog that knew where it wasn't wanted. Isaiah sat still in his seat, hands folded, eyes half closed, not in sleep, but in observation. He had lived long enough to know when a room had turned on him, and though the plane had climbed to cruising altitude, the altitude of judgment remained low and heavy. He could feel the woman beside him breathing in deliberate discomfort. Not loud enough to draw attention, but sharp enough that he would feel the accusation in every exhale. She shifted her body toward the aisle. She dabbed her forehead with a cloth-scented tissue. She tapped her fingers against her tray table like she was waiting for the world to fix itself around her discomfort. All without ever looking his way. Isaiah did not speak. He had learned, through years of classroom teaching and church deacon meetings and faculty potlucks where his potato salad was always politely untouched, that there are times when speaking makes things worse, not because you are wrong, but because the truth can be too heavy for the room to hold. A new flight attendant passed by. She was younger, black, and walked with a practiced posture that said she knew eyes followed her for more reasons than one. She smiled at Isaiah, softly, like she understood. And maybe she did. But she said nothing, just handed out pretzels and napkins and disappeared down the aisle. The gesture was enough to make him feel seen. Then came the second wound, not loud, but cutting. "Sir," Colton returned, holding a tablet. "I hate to ask again, but there's been a complaint from a passenger seated nearby. She says she feels uncomfortable." She didn't elaborate. "I'd just like to move you to avoid any situation." Isaiah turned slowly to face him. "A situation," he repeated. "And am I the situation?" Colton shifted. No, sir. It's not personal." She just... But it is personal. It became personal the moment she chose to make comfort a matter of proximity. Isaiah's voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes before thunder. Colton looked around, suddenly aware of nearby eyes watching. He gave a tight smile again and backed away, mumbling something about checking with the captain. Isaiah didn't move. Not physically and not emotionally. But his mind traveled back to 1972 when he sat in a diner in Georgia and the waitress brought water to everyone but him. Or 1984 when a police officer pulled him over and said, "You don't look like you drive this kind of car." Or 1999 when his son was denied admission to a school despite higher test scores than every other applicant. The details changed. The silence didn't. The flight moved on. Announcements. More snacks. A child's cry 2 rows back. Yet the tension pressed tighter against his ribs. He saw the white woman fidget, then reach for the call button. Another conversation, this time hushed, between her and Colton. A paper being filled out. Notes. Whispers. Isaiah's name was not spoken, but he could hear it anyway. When the plane landed, he waited, as was polite. The woman beside him rose quickly, grabbed her designer bag, and turned her back without a word. She had never spoken to him directly, not once. But she had told the world everything it needed to hear. As he stepped into the jet bridge, Isaiah felt the weight of it all. Not just the flight. The years. The glances. The laws that had changed, but not the minds. He walked slowly, not from age, but from the knowledge that dignity takes longer to carry than hate ever will. By the time he reached baggage claim, his phone buzzed. A message from his goddaughter. "Can't wait to see you, Uncle I see. You always bring the calm with you." He smiled. She didn't know how much effort that calm required. He stood beneath the fluorescent lights of the airport, surrounded by strangers, feeling the hum of a country that had never quite decided what to do with him. And he knew, somewhere deep in the marrow of his bones, that the flight was not the end of anything. It was just one more chapter in the story. America kept writing with invisible ink, hoping he'd forget how to read between the lines. The southern sun had barely crested the rooftops when Isaiah stepped out of the rideshare car in front of his goddaughter's house. The street was lined with magnolia trees and the slow drawl of a neighborhood pretending to be healed. In truth, Isaiah didn't trust any place that smiled too quickly. There was always something buried beneath the politeness. Olivia burst out the front door in a swirl of joy, arms open, voice like music. "Uncle IC," she called, wrapping him in a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and fresh hope. For a moment, the weight of the flight, the frozen stares and trembling smiles, melted into her embrace. He held her tightly, as if anchoring himself to something pure. Behind her stood a man, tall, sandy-haired, with the posture of someone always trying to seem smaller than he was. He extended a hand politely. "Trevor," he said. "Olivia's fiancé." Isaiah took his hand. "Pleasure," he answered, though it didn't quite taste right on his tongue. Trevor had soft palms and soft eyes, neither of which Isaiah trusted entirely. Not because he was white, but because men who wore their guilt like perfume had a way of making everything about their redemption. Inside, the house was modest and tastefully modern. Photographs of Olivia, laughing, painting, barefoot in the garden, lined the hallway. The air was thick with the scent of something baking, and the ceiling fans spun lazily overhead. Trevor offered him coffee. Isaiah nodded once. As he settled into the living room, Olivia perched on the armrest beside him, her energy bright. "You look tired," she said, brushing invisible lint from his coat. "Was the flight okay?" Isaiah hesitated. "It was a flight," he said finally. "They tend to be what they've always been. You get where you're going, but not always how you want to arrive." She sensed it. "Something happened?" He nodded. "Another lesson in American hospitality." He said no more. She said no more. But something settled between them. A quiet understanding passed from one generation to the next, the way Black families have always had to share knowledge, not in shouting, but in silence. Later that evening, friends and family gathered for a small dinner ahead of the wedding weekend. There was chicken pot pie, laughter, too many folding chairs, and just enough wine to loosen the edges of speech. An older white neighbor, Mrs. Green, arrived wearing pearls and a practiced grin. "So this is the famous Uncle Isaiah," she exclaimed too loudly. "Olivia's told us so much about you. She says you taught history. Real history, not the kind you get in textbooks." Imagine that. Isaiah smiled the way one learns to smile when there are no exits near the table. "I tried to give my students what they were owed," he said, sipping his water slowly. "Fascinating," she continued. "You must have such perspectives on, well, everything that's been happening these last few years. All the, racial tension." "We were just talking about that at the book club." Isaiah nodded. "Racial tension has been happening for the last few centuries, Mrs. Green. It's only recently become visible to the people who've had the luxury not to see it." There was a pause. A wine glass clinked against a plate somewhere in the kitchen. Trevor chuckled nervously. "Well, isn't that the truth?" Mrs. Green said with a smile that no longer reached her eyes. "Still, I'm so glad we're having these conversations now. So important." Isaiah didn't answer. He knew the type, people who liked conversations more than consequences. Who believed awareness was action. Who would rather speak of healing before they even admitted to the wound. After dinner, he stepped out onto the porch to smoke. He didn't smoke often anymore, doctor's orders, but tonight he needed something that burned. Trevor joined him after a while, hands in his pockets. "She means well," Trevor offered. "So did the architect of every broken promise in this country," Isaiah replied. Trevor looked down. I know this isn't easy." Isaiah turned to him, eyes sharp. "Easy would have been living in a country where I didn't have to spend 60 years proving I deserved to sit where I sat. On a bus. At a lunch counter. In a classroom. On a plane." Trevor nodded slowly. "I guess I've never thought about it that way." "That's the point," Isaiah said. "You never had to." Silence again. But not empty. Heavy. Inside, laughter rose from the dining room. Olivia's voice rang out, full and joyous, and for a moment Isaiah allowed himself to believe that the next generation might carry something lighter. But he also knew the weight had not disappeared. It had only shifted, waiting for another flight, another dinner, another conversation where everything polite would unravel. As the night wore on, he sat on that porch long after the others had gone to bed. The stars above were indifferent. The wind moved the trees like ghosts shaking their heads. And Isaiah wondered, not for the first time, how many more times a man had to forgive a country for refusing to see him. The morning sun pressed against the windows like it was trying to decide whether to shine or apologize. Inside the house, everything was movement, coffee brewing, dresses being steamed, ties being knotted and unknotted, laughter stumbling out of hallways trying too hard to sound natural. The wedding rehearsal was that afternoon, and Isaiah, still adjusting to the small aches of age and the large aches of memory, found himself seated at the breakfast table with Trevor's father, a man named Grant Whitman. Retired banker, Harvard tie, thin lips, firm handshake. The sort of man who believed that his ability to sit comfortably beside a black man proved racism was over. "I hear you were a teacher," Grant said, sipping black coffee from a porcelain cup with a gold rim. "History, was it?" Isaiah nodded. "Yes, American history, but the kind they don't put on currency." Grant chuckled. "Always good to hear from someone on the inside of things. You must have seen the world change quite a bit in your lifetime." Isaiah looked at him. "It changed, but not always forward." Grant leaned in, as though about to offer some wisdom passed down through generations of boardroom diplomacy. "I like to think we've made progress, though. I mean, look at us. Having breakfast together. 50 years ago, that would have been impossible." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. 50 years ago, it was illegal. Today, it's merely uncomfortable. Grant blinked, his smile faltering just a breath. "Well, I didn't mean anything by it." "You never do," Isaiah said softly, folding his napkin and standing. "That's the trouble." Later, at the rehearsal, the sanctuary of the small church echoed with preparations. White folding chairs, tulle bows. Soft gospel music played through a Bluetooth speaker, and the wedding planner, a perky white woman named Mallory, was moving people around like chess pieces she couldn't quite remember how to play. "Father of the bride here," she said, gesturing to Isaiah toward the altar. "Oh, wait, you're her uncle, right?" "Not the actual father, sorry." He gave a tight smile. "Her father's not here. I'll be walking her down the aisle." "Oh," Mallory said, blinking fast. "Right, of course. I just assumed." "Yes," Isaiah cut in. "A lot of people do." She moved on quickly, but Isaiah stood still for a moment, staring down the aisle like it was longer than it was. In that instant, he could see every pew where judgment might sit, every whispered word, every glance Olivia might catch and pretend not to feel. After the rehearsal, Olivia took his arm. "You okay?" He nodded, the way black men have always nodded when their bodies wanted to rage, but their spirits had already paid the price. Just thinking about how hard the walk to dignity can be. They stood together in the empty church, her hand still on his sleeve. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "I can always ask someone else." "No," Isaiah said. "It's my honor. And my burden." That evening, the rehearsal dinner was held at a country club on the edge of town, red brick facade, white columns, the whole plantation chic aesthetic wrapped in linen napkins and silver flatware. Isaiah hadn't wanted to go. He had been to enough places like it, places where black men were either values or ghosts. But Olivia had asked, and so he wore his best navy suit and polished shoes that no one would notice, because respectability was still armor, even when it didn't stop the bullets. Inside, the air was crisp with money and careful manners. Olivia introduced him to some of Trevor's extended family, and each handshake felt like a polite inspection. The kind where they smile while wondering how you got past the door. An older woman, Trevor's aunt perhaps, leaned in with too much perfume and not enough tact. "I think it's wonderful," she said, smiling too hard. "Really, the way families are coming together these days. So modern, so brave of Olivia." Isaiah held her gaze. Brave? She blinked, then laughed. Oh, you know what I mean. I think I do, he replied. Later, during dinner, the club manager approached Olivia and whispered something. She turned pale. What's wrong? Isaiah asked. They need to check your membership status, she said quietly. They're asking if you're a guest of someone on file. Isaiah sat back in his chair. I'm here as the bride's family, he said. I know, she whispered. I told them. They just want to double-check. Trevor stood, flustered. I'll handle this. But Isaiah raised a hand. Let them ask. Moments later, a staff member came by with a clipboard, eyes flickering nervously. Sorry, sir, just protocol. Protocol? Isaiah echoed, taking the pen and writing "Uncle" in the blank space for membership affiliation. The staff member nodded and disappeared. Olivia was red with anger. I'm so sorry, Uncle, I see. It's all right, he said. This is what it costs to be included in places that never wanted you in the first place. Trevor tried to offer a defense, but Isaiah cut him off with a look. Son, sometimes the best apology is silence. Sit with shame. Let it teach you something. The evening wore on with speeches and toasts, but the taste of the incident lingered like bitterness in the wine. Isaiah excused himself early and walked outside, into the dark. The night air was quiet, honest. He lit a cigarette, again, against doctor's orders, and stared up at the stars. Somewhere inside, Olivia was smiling through it, laughing too loudly. Somewhere inside, another generation was learning how to shrink themselves into civility. And out here, Isaiah exhaled and whispered to no one, How long, Lord? How long must we still pay tolls at the gates we built? He flicked the ash into the wind. The fight had changed shapes, that was all. Same war, new runes. The church bell rang like it was trying to wake the dead. Outside, the morning air was soft with early spring, too gentle for what the day was about to require. Inside, preparations churned like a machine greased with nerves, flowers being fluffed, veils adjusted, ties retied by hands that had retired them before. Isaiah sat in the back room, alone, a small Bible open in his lap though he wasn't reading. The pages were familiar, yes, but they were not enough. Not today. What he needed wasn't comfort, it was clarity. A knock came. Olivia. She looked like every dream he had ever prayed for her. The gown, simple and graceful. The makeup, soft enough to show her freckles. And behind it all, the steel of a black woman choosing joy in a world designed to keep her cautious. You look beautiful, he said. She smiled. You look nervous. I am, he confessed. Not about the walk. About everything after. They sat together for a moment, the kind of silence that holds hands with memory. You don't have to do this, Olivia said again. Not if it's going to be too much. I want to, he said. But I need you to know if I feel them trying to make me invisible again, I won't stay quiet. She nodded. I wouldn't want you to. Outside, the guests were arriving. Cars parked like chess pieces. Hats bobbing. Suits gleaming. It was a diverse gathering on paper. But even a rainbow has shadows when it stretches across old soil. Inside the sanctuary, Isaiah felt at the moment he stepped into the aisle. Eyes. Not all, but enough. The polite ones, the curious ones, the narrowed and calculating ones. They looked at him the way you look at a piano in a room full of violins, present, but out of place. He walked Olivia slowly, deliberately, every step echoing through a century of denied entrances. At the altar, Trevor stood beaming. Handsome, sincere. Isaiah studied his face. The boy meant well. But meaning and understanding were not the same. One was a smile. The other was a scar. The ceremony began. The minister, a white man with a voice like softened butter, spoke of unity, of love transcending barriers, of how far we've come. Isaiah felt the words hang in the air like perfume, pleasant, but false. During the vows, the minister turned to the audience and said, Is there anyone who finds reason these two should not be joined? Speak now. A cough interrupted. Not a word. Just a cough. From the second row. Grant Whitman. A cough, perfectly timed. Isaiah turned his head slightly. Grant looked away. It wasn't loud enough to halt the wedding, but it was loud enough to remind Isaiah what always lingered beneath civility. A disapproving ghost. The ceremony ended in applause and camera flashes. People stood and clapped and smiled wide. But Isaiah caught the glance between two of Trevor's uncles, caught the whisper that wasn't meant to carry, "Well, it's done now." At the reception, the ballroom glowed with soft chandeliers and a playlist of agreeable music. The speeches began. Olivia's maid of honor spoke of friendship and wine nights and late-night phone calls. Trevor's best man, a white college roommate, joked about getting used to colored greens. Laughter, measured and awkward, spread across the tables. Then it was Isaiah's turn. He rose slowly, the room quieting as he made his way to the microphone. His hands trembled only slightly, not from nerves, but from restraint. He looked at the crowd, then at Olivia. She nodded. "I've been asked to say a few words," he began. "But I've learned over time that words aren't always what people remember. Sometimes it's the things you don't say. The silence that follows an insult. The nod you give when you want to scream. The seat you're not offered. The invitation that never comes." A shifting in the chairs. Forks clinked against untouched plates. "I've watched Olivia grow into a woman who has made her own choices. And I'm proud of her. Proud that she walks forward with her eyes open. But let me be honest with you all, this wedding, though filled with love, is also surrounded by history. A history that doesn't vanish just because the cake is pretty." Trevor's mother looked down at her lap. "I have heard more than once, these past few days, the word progress. I've seen smiles stretched over unease. Heard people call this union brave when what they really mean is unexpected. Let me tell you something, there is nothing brave about love. What's brave is the decision to keep loving in a country that has not always loved you back." A pause. A breath. "To my niece, I say, do not shrink for their comfort. To Trevor, I say, protect her not just from the world, but from the people who share your last name." There was no applause when he finished. Just silence. Honest, tight silence. He returned to his seat, heart pounding. Olivia reached for his hand. "I meant it," he whispered. "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." After the toasts, as the dancing began, a few guests approached him. Some with forced smiles, some with genuine respect, and some avoided him entirely, choosing instead to twirl beneath chandeliers and pretend the air was sweet. But Isaiah stood by the wall, watching it all unfold. Not bitter. Not angry. Just awake. And knowing that the hardest part wasn't over. It was only the beginning. There is a silence more suffocating than noise, a silence that follows truth, not because it was misunderstood, but because it was understood too well. 2 days after the wedding, Isaiah sat alone at a small diner just outside town. The kind of place where the coffee burned your tongue but the waitress knew your name. He stirred the cream slowly, not to cool it, but to remember something, perhaps a time when speaking truth didn't leave you lonelier than lies. The ceremony had ended, the champagne bottles emptied, but the cost was still being tallied. Trevor hadn't called. Olivia's texts were briefer than usual. Isaiah could feel it in the way the world turned ever so slightly away from him. The weight of truth, once spoken, shifts the center of gravity. He took a sip. Bitter. No sugar. He liked it that way now. He'd learned to take things straight. Outside, the parking lot stretched beneath an overcast sky, and he saw a familiar car pull in. A silver sedan, polished to a blinding shine. Trevor's mother stepped out, her shoes clicking across the asphalt with the purpose of a woman used to doors opening before her. She walked in, spotted him, didn't smile. "Isaiah," she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a task. He nodded politely. "Mrs. Whitmore." She sat down across from him, her coat folded like judgment over her lap. I'm going to speak plainly, she began. Your little speech at the wedding upset a great many people. He raised an eyebrow. Truth has a tendency to do that. She ignored him. We were trying to create a moment of unity, a bridge between families. And instead, you made it political. Isaiah chuckled, low and tired. Ma'am, I didn't make it political. I made it plain. The politics were already there, in the glances, in the expectations, in the seat assignments. She flinched slightly, but continued. Trevor's father has business clients who were there. People who don't appreciate being made to feel uncomfortable. Isaiah leaned forward. Maybe it's time they sat in that discomfort for once. Some of us live in it. She looked at him as though he had cussed in church. And in a way, he had. He had broken a sacred rule of the polite society they clung to. Don't say what everybody knows. Don't speak about the wound. Don't touch the bruise. I came here, she said stiffly, because I want to ask that you not attend the post-wedding brunch. There it was. Isaiah nodded slowly, as if considering something. Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, do you believe I love Olivia? She hesitated. That's not the issue. It is the only issue, he said. Because if I do, and you believe that I do, then you understand why I said what I said. Because I have no interest in seeing her shrink herself to fit into a room too small for her brilliance. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile. You people always think the world is against you. Isaiah stood too, calm as a lake before thunder. No, ma'am. We don't think it. We live it. There's a difference. She left without saying goodbye. He watched her go, then sat back down and finished his coffee. It tasted stronger now. That evening, Olivia called. Her voice was quiet. Trevor's family is upset, she said. They think you embarrass them. Did I embarrass you? No, she said quickly. Then, slower. But it's complicated. It always is, Isaiah said. That's the problem. The next day, the family group chat, a digital confession booth of the modern age, lit up with coded concern. Aunt Ruth wrote, "We all want peace." Cousin Ellie chimed in, "There's a time and place for those conversations." Even Olivia remained mostly silent. The echo of Isaiah's words bounced back as accusations, not reflections. The preacher who'd led the ceremony called him. Said he understood where his heart was, but warned him that unity required restraint. Isaiah asked him gently, "Is unity more important than truth?" The line went quiet. Later, walking through the park, Isaiah saw a black boy riding a bike too big for his frame. A white woman on the bench nearby gripped her purse. Subtle, but not invisible. That was how it was. The world didn't shout its fears. It whispered to them through gestures. He thought about Trevor. A good man. But being good wasn't enough if you refused to see. At dinner, Isaiah sat across from Olivia. Her face was worn, not angry, just tired. "I need to ask," she said. "Do you regret it?" He thought carefully. "I regret that it had to be said. But not that I said it." She nodded. Her eyes welled with tears that didn't fall. "They've asked Trevor to speak to me." Isaiah swallowed. "And will he?" "I don't know," she said. "But I know what side of the table I'll be on when he does." They ate in silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of storm clouds gathering. The kind that brings change, whether the people beneath them are ready or not. And Isaiah, for all his weariness, knew one thing. Truth, once spoken, does not unspeak itself. It lingers. It seeds. It grows. Even if, at first, it grows in the cracks. You see, in America, the real trouble is never the riot. It is what comes before it. What simmers quietly behind lace curtains and manicured lawns. The riot is only a mirror that someone finally dares to lift. And so it was that Isaiah found himself, not at the center of a riot, but at the edges of something colder and erasure. A slow, practiced forgetting by people who claimed to have heard him, yet never truly listened. After the wedding, the air grew tense around Olivia. Her inbox filled with polite messages from Trevor's extended family thanking her for a beautiful ceremony, but with not a single mention of Isaiah. The man who walked her down the aisle had become a ghost at his own niece's feast. At first, Isaiah tried to brush it off. He had spent most of his life being both essential and invisible, called upon when needed, cast aside when inconvenient. But there was something about this silence that was a bit deeper. Not just because it came from strangers, but because it seeped into his own blood. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Trevor appeared on Isaiah's doorstep. Alone. He didn't bring flowers. Just a folded lawn chair under his arm and a bottle of wine that neither of them would drink. "I thought we could talk," Trevor said. Isaiah stepped aside and let him in. The porch creaked beneath them, an old, honest sound that welcomed no lies. "I want you to know I respect what you said," Trevor began, eyes focused on the middle distance. "I understand it came from a place of love." But Isaiah said softly, "There's always a but." Trevor hesitated. "But it made things complicated. For Olivia. For my family. Complication is the price of truth," Isaiah said. "Your family was just fine with silence. They mistake that for peace. I just think maybe, another time, another place would have been better." Isaiah's laugh was short and hollow. "That's what they've always said. Not here, not now. Wait your turn. Lower your voice." "But it never becomes the right time, does it?" Trevor looked down. "I'm trying, Isaiah. I really am." "I know," Isaiah said. "But trying doesn't carry the burden. Living does." The next week, a columnist from a local magazine published a feel-good story about interracial unity, using Olivia and Trevor's wedding as an example. There was a photo, Olivia, radiant, smiling. Trevor, proud beside her. Isaiah had been cropped out. Entirely. No one had asked his permission. No one had even told him. He found out when a grocery store clerk, an old white man who had once fought in Korea and still called him Youngblood, held up the magazine and said, "This your girl? She's famous now. Must be really proud." Isaiah nodded. "Always have been." But something inside him bent, just a little more. That night, Olivia came to visit. She'd seen the article, too. Her hands trembled as she clutched the magazine. "I didn't know they were running this," she said. "I swear I didn't." "I believe you," Isaiah replied. "But someone knew. And someone chose." She looked at him, her eyes wet. "They made you disappear." He smiled, a sad, tired smile. "They've been doing that a long time, baby. Long before magazines." Olivia dropped onto the couch beside him. "I told Trevor we're not doing interviews unless you're included." He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Isaiah exhaled slowly. "He's a good man, Liv. But being good isn't the same as being brave. And sometimes, not being brave is just another kind of betrayal." Silence again. But not comfort. Later, when Olivia left, Isaiah sat on the porch with the magazine in his lap. His photo, absent. His presence, erased. But his words still lingered in the air, like smoke from a fire that refused to die. The final blow came the following Sunday. He went to church. It was the church he'd been baptized in. The one his father had helped build brick by brick, back when colored was the only word written on their welcome sign. Isaiah had taught Sunday school there. Had led prayer when the reverend was sick. Had mopped the very floors they walked on. But that Sunday, as he entered the sanctuary, several congregants shifted. Not rudely, not dramatically, but enough to feel it. During the service, the Reverend made mention of choosing love over division and healing from hurtful words spoken in anger. People nodded. Some even glanced back at Isaiah, as though he had started a fire, not just lit a match to show the rot in the walls. Afterward, no one said much. Some offered the kind of nod you give to strangers at funerals. Others pretended not to see him at all. He walked out before the benediction. Because sometimes the most violent part of racism isn't what's shouted. It's what's never said. He walked home through streets he knew like his own heartbeat. The mailboxes leaned the same way. The trees whispered the same hymns. But nothing felt familiar anymore. He thought about his mother, who once told him, "You speak truth, baby, and it'll either set you free or leave you lonely. Sometimes both." And he thought about Olivia. About the little girl who once drew stars in the margins of her church programs, and the woman who now stood between two worlds, trying to make peace, trying not to shatter. And then he thought, maybe peace is the wrong goal. Maybe justice is what we owe each other. There are moments in a man's life when silence becomes betrayal. And there are rooms, full of light and ceremony, where the darkest truths finally find the air they've been denied. Isaiah wasn't searching for justice anymore. He was demanding clarity. And clarity has a way of burning everything it touches. The invitation came like a thunderclap wrapped in lace. Join us for a community brunch in honor of the newlyweds Olivia and Trevor Whitmore, hosted by the Whitmore family. It was meant to soothe the community, to prove that all was well, that race was a footnote in a fairy tale. The menu was polished. The speeches had been drafted. The photographers prepped. But the truth, God help them, was not invited. Not officially. Still, Isaiah dressed that morning as if for a funeral. A charcoal suit, a pocket square his wife had once folded into place decades ago. He looked into the mirror and did not smile. He simply nodded to himself, the way soldiers do when they know the road ahead will not end in comfort. The venue was a restored plantation house, rented now for weddings and high-end social functions, white columns, wide porches, and the ghosts of slaves clinging to the roots of the trees. Isaiah had not forgotten what had happened on land like this. But the people sipping champagne seemed to have. Olivia ran up to him the moment he arrived, breathless and radiant and terrified all at once. "Uncle," she whispered, "please, today is delicate." Isaiah looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Delicate," he repeated. "Delicate like a lie balanced on fine bone china." She squeezed his hand. They asked Trevor's father to speak. He wants to address what happened, with respect. Isaiah said nothing, but Olivia saw the flicker in his eyes. She stepped back, unsure. The room filled with polite applause as Judge Whitmore took the stage. Tall, silver-haired, with a voice marinated in power and law. He began his speech the way they all do, with charm. Stories about Olivia's grace and Trevor's fortitude. Jokes about marriage. A prayer for unity. Then his tone shifted. "And while some recent tensions may have caused discomfort," he said, scanning the crowd, "let us not dwell on past misunderstandings. Let us instead move forward together." There it was. The white glove that smothered the flame. The appeal to unity that asked only one side to forget. Isaiah rose. Slowly, quietly. But the movement caught the room like a ripple. He walked toward the front. Olivia's eyes widened. Trevor stood up halfway, as if to intercept him, but stopped. Isaiah reached the stage and turned to the crowd. "I promise I'll be brief," he said, voice even, low, and deep as thunder that hasn't yet struck. "But it seems we're celebrating a union while ignoring the fracture beneath it." A hush fell. The only sound was the quiet groan of floorboards too old to carry this kind of weight. "I've been told," he continued, "that my speaking truths about race, about history, about discomfort, have caused unease. Maybe I should have chosen a better time. Maybe I should have been quieter, softer, more delicate." He looked at Judge Whitmore. Not with anger. With clarity. "But Black folk have been delicate for 400 years. We've whispered our pains so long, you started thinking we didn't feel it. And every time we speak a little louder, we're told it's the wrong time." Trevor's father shifted, stiffened. "What I said at that wedding," Isaiah said, now facing Olivia, "was not to hurt you. It was to remind this room and this family that love built on silence is not love. It's fear. And fear does not hold up under pressure." The older white guests looked uncomfortable now. Some fidgeted. Some looked away. But Olivia was still, tears balanced on her lashes. Isaiah continued. "I've been a Black man in America long enough to know what it costs to speak plainly. It costs invitations, promotions, Sometimes it costs peace with your own kin. But if I leave this world having said nothing when I knew better, what was my life for? He paused, then lowered his voice. This country taught me how to endure. But it never taught me how to belong. And if I don't belong in the house I helped build, then maybe it's the house that needs renovation, not me. Silence. Heavy as winter soil. Then, from the back, a single clap. Then another. And another. Until a small current of applause grew, awkward, unsure, but real. Isaiah didn't wait for permission. He stepped down and walked outside. The air hit him like absolution. A moment later, Olivia followed. She stood beside him, quiet. "You wrecked the brunch," she said, half laughing through tears. Isaiah looked toward the horizon. "I didn't wreck it, baby. I just opened the blinds." She nodded slowly. Then, softly, "I think I see more clearly now."